Well, I think we'll get started here. Again, my name is Vern Fish. We got one more coming in. Give them a second or two to join. My name is Vern Fish. I'm the president of the Friends of Wabakimi. Our board chair, Dave McTeague, has another obligation tonight, so I get to do this without any supervision. Please note that the proceedings are being recorded, and I have put you on mute and limited your access at beginning because we had a bad situation. We were bombed at a previous webinar. At the end, I'll open it up and then we can have a little more of a general chat. But use the chat function as a way to communicate if you got questions. So with that, we're going to get started, and it's really with great pleasure on my part to introduce Kristen. Kristen and she'll go into more detail on her title, but she worked with Ontario Nature. As she noted, her last day is today with Ontario Nature. We were very fortunate that a group of us got to travel with Kristen on the Big River in the Crown Land north of Armstrong, north and 3 hours north of Thunder Bay, and did a bird survey. And it was my first exposure to actually participating in that process. And Kristen's been doing it over a much larger scale. I got to do one, she got to do several. And so we're very, very pleased to have her here tonight to do a presentation. And at the end, hopefully I will remember, we were raising money for Wapakimi Park to buy some song meter automatic recording units. And we met our goal, and those who made a contribution are in a lottery to win a tarp. And I got a drawing for that at the end of this. So hopefully I don't forget to do that. So with that, I'm going to let Kristen have the floor and take it away. Kristen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vern. So yes, welcome everybody. I'm very happy to be here on my last day with Ontario Nature. It feels kind of fitting to talk a little bit about my work with them and with the Atlas. So yeah, I'm going to talk tonight about the third breeding bird atlas, which I was recording birds for on this Big River trip. And I'll talk a little bit about how paddlers can get involved as well. So I'll just start by introducing myself a little bit. So I am a long-time birder, born and raised in Thunder Bay. So the north and the north of Ontario is pretty near and dear to my heart. Spent a lot of time outdoors as a child, and it was just a real treat getting to do that for work this year. So as you may know, I am Ontario Nature's community science assistant. I can still call myself that for the next hour. But yes, it's my last day. I'm very sad. It's been just over a year since I've been working with them. And my main focus with Ontario Nature was this breeding bird atlas project and kind of integrating that into community science and protected areas. And this Big River trip that I went on with Vern and others this year was actually my very first multi-day canoe trip. So it was a heck of a first trip. It was pretty full on, but it was just amazing. We had a great team, and I loved just being out counting birds all day. It was really dreamy. So yeah, that's a bit about me. And I'll show you a little bit about what I'm going to chat about today. So I'll give you a little bit of background information on the Atlas, just so you have some context and kind of understand the jargon and things that I'm talking about. I will then discuss different types of atlasing and how to record data. Then I'll touch a little bit on our trip and how I collected data during this trip in a paddling context. And we'll move into how paddlers like you can get involved if you're interested. So with that being said, let's get started. So a little bit about the Atlas. It is a partnership between 5 organizations. So they're listed here: Birds Canada, Canadian Wildlife Service, the Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources and Forestry, Ontario Field Ornithologists, and of course, Ontario Nature. and it is the third breeding bird atlas in Ontario. So they've been happening every 20 years since 1981. So this project will run, or is running, from 2021 to 2025. So we're kind of just in the middle of the project right now. So the goal of the atlas is to document the relative abundance and distribution of the approximately 300 breeding bird species in Ontario, and comparing the data to data from previous atlases can be really useful in showing how populations have changed, how the relative abundance of certain species have changed, things like that. And one very important factor about the atlas is that it's mainly driven by volunteers. So it's a huge community science project that is only able to happen with the help of thousands of volunteers. So it's a really, really neat project. And this was actually my first year participating. So it was a huge learning curve, but it was really neat to be a part of. So just a little bit of context for birds. So we're currently facing a loss of biodiversity, as I'm sure you all know. Birds are facing increasing threats, and several groups have majorly declined in the past few decades. There have been several reports released in the past few years about the status of birds in the world and of birds in Canada. Some groups that are majorly declining would be grassland birds, aerial insectivores like swallows and swifts, and shorebirds. So the atlas data will help keep track of the state of Canada's birds and identify species who may need more conservation efforts or attention, and identify significant breeding areas as well. So how does the atlas work? The province is divided into 10 by 10 kilometer squares using the UTM system. And in order to complete the surveying of a square, 20 hours of atlasing must be done within that square over the 5-year period. And the goals for different areas of the province are different as well. So as you can see from this diagram, the survey target effort from the south of Ontario is 100% of the squares to be completed. The middle portion here is the road accessible north, which is where kind of the Wabakimi area would fit under. And then for that road accessible north, the target is 5% of the squares. And then the far north is 2% of the squares, which doesn't sound like a lot, but there's a lot of land up there. So even 2% of the squares is a lot of work, and 5% in the road accessible north is a lot too. So just to give you a bit of context. So when collecting data for the atlas, one would be documenting breeding evidence in all types of habitat within a square or a region per se. So surveying for the atlas can happen throughout the year, but the most valuable data comes from the peak breeding season. And in the north, the peak breeding season is June 1st to July 10th. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these dates in a bit. There are also these standardized counts called point counts. And a square is required to have 25 point counts completed over the 5-year period in order for it to be a complete square. So yeah, that's a little bit about the technicalities there. Looks good, no questions so far. So there are several types of atlasing, or several ways to contribute to the atlas. There's general atlasing, point counts, incidental records, and special surveys. Special surveys could be things like owl surveys or marsh bird surveys. And I have these highlighted because I'm not going to get into those today. But I'll link to the website later just in case anybody's really keen. So general atlasing is pretty straightforward. Basically, it's just recording checklists of the birds that you see and or hear while documenting any breeding evidence that you see. So like I said, this can happen all year round, but obviously for many species, breeding evidence will be found only within that peak breeding period. Some exceptions would be like owls. Owls breed a bit earlier, but I'll get into those dates again more, like I said. So breeding evidence, there are different types. There is observed, there's possible, probable, and confirmed breeding. And I'm going to show you a little diagram here of the observed breeding to the confirmed. So observed, it would be the weakest level of evidence, and confirmed breeding would be the strongest level of evidence. I think that's pretty straightforward, but I wanted to give you just a little example of each. So this is a handy sheet that you can get on the Birds Ontario web page. And for me personally, being my first year atlasing, this was a very handy tool to have because there are a lot of different codes. So for example, a possible breeding could be seeing a male bird or hearing a male bird singing in its suitable habitat. So obviously that's not confirmed breeding, but it is possible. Probable could be one step higher, and that could be courtship or display. So if you're seeing some birds doing a courtship ritual, then you know that's probable breeding evidence. And something like confirmed would be nest with young in it. So you can kind of see how the hierarchy is demonstrated there. And I have one more kind of technical looking sheet to show you, and then I promise it'll get a little less techie, but I thought I'd give you all of the information first. So when I talked about the peak breeding season, obviously that is a little bit different for each species. So this is a very useful tool that the Atlas has created. They call these safe dates. So basically this table, I'm not going to go over how it really works, but these different colors will tell you when to expect the bird to be just a migrant passing through. So if you saw it, it wouldn't necessarily be breeding within that area or within that square. And then when it is safe to assume that this bird is actually breeding within that square. So it's a little bit complicated, but if you're looking to get involved with the Atlas and record data, this is a very useful tool to have. And once you kind of learn how to use it, it's quite handy, and it's not as difficult as it looks. And just to give you some context, during our trip this year, we went in late May and the beginning of June. So as you can imagine, a lot of birds were just returning back up north. So I had to look at this table a lot because I was thinking, oh, I'm hearing this warbler singing. I should mark that as possible breeding because it's singing. But you have to be a little bit careful because that warbler could still be passing through at that time because it was still a bit early in the breeding season. It wasn't that peak breeding season time. So I hope that is a little bit easy to understand and doesn't confuse you more, but that's how we record dates in the Atlas, or we keep track of dates. So the next type of atlasing is point counts. So this is the primary method for determining relative abundance. So this is kind of the most valuable data for the Atlas because they are standardized tests where you record all the birds you see and hear in a predetermined location during a 5-minute interval. And this location is the same location as in the previous atlases. So they can actually go back and compare to previous atlases from those same points. So that's pretty interesting. And one thing to note is that point counts are only done during that peak breeding season. So June 1st to July 10th in the north is generally the time where you would be in the clear to conduct point counts. And I will say you have to have you have to be a bit more experienced to do point counts. As a newbie atlaser, it was a big learning curve for me because a lot of times in the spring, you're only hearing the birds, you're not seeing them. So you have to kind of train your ear to recognize those calls and songs. So it is a little bit tricky for beginner birders, but it's a really fun way to learn bird calls, is to do these counts. And there is a neat thing that the atlasers have been using, and it's a handheld recording device. They use this device called the Zoom H2N, and you can also record point counts on this handheld device. So that's really nice for people who maybe don't have the best hearing or don't have a great ear for birds. You can also use these devices. I know the atlas has a limited amount, but each regional coordinator for the atlas has a couple. So it's a pretty neat tool to use. And the last type of atlasing, which may be most relevant for some people here, are incidental records. So incidental records are sightings that you record while you're not already doing a birding checklist. For example, if you're just out paddling, but you see something notable, that would be just an incidental record. You didn't go out to do a checklist or to bird. That wasn't your main focus, but you do have something to record. So that's what that means. And when I say notable sightings, I mean, these would be species of interest or documentation of high breeding evidence. For example, seeing a nest with young. You wouldn't necessarily want to mark down every single chickadee that you see, because the odds are, if you do a checklist, you're probably going to get a chickadee. So you don't have to stop every 5 seconds in your boat and record every bird you see, but it's more for the for species of interest or high breeding evidence. And this happened to us several times on the trip, actually, where we would be paddling and we either noticed a nest or we heard some little sounds. We noted a raven's nest as an incidental count while we were paddling once. There were some ravens going into their nest and we could hear their young calling, which was really cool. So that just gives you a bit of an example there. So that brings me to our trip. So as Vern said, I joined a handful of the Friends of Wabakimi folks this May to paddle the Big River watershed. And there were kind of two main goals for this trip. My goal was to conduct breeding bird atlas surveys in 5 of these atlas squares that we were passing through. And the second was to demonstrate and document the use of the canoe routes within the Wabadao-Gang Nukning Forest. I'm probably not saying that correctly, but that's okay. So as you may know, the forest management plan for this forest was being drafted this year. So I think part of the reason, or the information gained during this trip, was definitely helpful for writing that draft plan. So that gives you a bit of context for why this trip was happening. But my main job over the trip was to do these atlas surveys, which was Just so awesome. Spent 8 days just counting birds every day, which was kind of my dream. So to collect data, I used this app called Nature Counts, and this is where the atlas data is compiled. The really nice thing about this app is that you can use it offline. So obviously when we were out in the bush, we didn't have service, but I could still record my checklists on here and save them as drafts. And then once I got back to service, I could submit them. So that's a really neat new thing that this atlas has developed. And your GPS track for the app can work offline as well. So it will actually track exactly where you are, which is just really cool. And I'm sure that there is a capacity for the number of checklists you can store before submitting, but I never had a problem with that. I would imagine if you're going for like a multiple week trip, you might run into issues if you have a lot stacked up. It'd be a bit stressful to risk losing that data, but I never had a problem with it and it worked really well for me. So that was cool. And I also use these autonomous recording units. So you might be aware of these now because you had just done your project for this, but I'll give you a bit of background. So these ARUs are used to record crepuscular and nocturnal birds. Crepuscular birds being birds that are most active during dawn and dusk. And they can be placed overnight or for the duration of the breeding season. But if you are leaving it out for the season, keep in mind that it must be retrieved at a later date. We did that on this trip and we ended up retrieving it. It was a close call. It was a bit of a doozy getting back to that recording unit, but we did it. So that was great. And setting up these recording units is really cool because it allows data from very remote areas to be collected and potentially some gaps in data collection to be filled. So it's very, very interesting.
Hey, Kristen, I'm going to ask a question. Have you gotten the results back from that recording yet? That'll happen later this year.
Yeah. So what happened was things just moved really slow with me, obviously retrieving this device and some others. So my original plan was to get interpretation done myself and kind of get that atlas or that data entered into the atlas, but just with the timing and my contract was supposed to end last month, I wasn't able to take that on. So one of the atlas organizers from CWS offered to do the interpretation with his like 100 song meters that he has out. So it is in the works, but I'm not sure what the timeline looks on that. Sorry, I wish I had a better answer for you. And I just wanted to say congratulations because I knew that you exceeded your goal. So congratulations. And I'm excited to see who wins this draw later. So when you are setting out these recording units, there's some documentation to do, including obviously recording your GPS coordinates. If you're putting it out into the middle of the bush, record the track that you take to get there, the serial number, your name, and the habitat type that it's in. So generally for atlasing, you like to be within a certain type of habitat, not necessarily on like the line. So if you're in a coniferous forest, maybe walk like a couple 100 meters in so you're not on the line of like deciduous and coniferous, that sort of thing. And some considerations when you place it. Obviously, you want it to be securely fastened to the tree. You don't want it to be like swaying in the wind or anything like that. So I used big gear ties and zip ties for the long-term ones. I already said within a certain type of habitat and in a quiet area. So these are really sensitive microphones. And you want to make sure you don't place it too close to a campsite where it would pick up maybe like people chatting or snoring. And you don't want to put it near running water. So no, like not by any streams or beaches or anything like that. So for me, these were my daily Atlas duties on our trip. So I would retrieve the ARU that I put out the night before in the morning. So I would put an ARU out every night, usually near our campsite. So I would start off by doing that. And while we were paddling, I would record any incidental counts that I had. And while we were either having lunch or on a portage, I would also record bird checklists at that point as well. So I was kind of just recording checklists as much as I could whenever we had a minute to stop. And then of course in the evening I would go out and set up the autonomous recording device. So that was my day in the life of atlasing. Of course, in the middle of that, there's portaging and paddling and all the other great things that come with the canoe trip, and dragging boats through downfall and, you know, all that fun stuff. So I was very lucky because Vern and the other folks were super supportive of my surveying. So I feel like I got a little bit of special treatment because I got to, you know, take my time looking at the birds, walking nice and slow down the portages.
Kristen, you did the dishes just like everybody else. I'm amazed that how much stuff you got done out there.
Oh,
Don't let her fool you. She volunteered to carry my boat across a couple of times because she felt sorry for me.
that's not entirely true, but yeah, I'd say we all put in our work, which was good. All this to say, I was very well supported, so it was great. And during our trip, we documented 62 bird species, so it was quite a few species in there. And there were lots of diverse habitats, which in turn gave us a lot of diverse species as well. We saw several species of sparrows. Every day it seemed like a new warbler was coming back, which was so exciting to see. And we also did note a couple species at risk too. These are both of least concern, but the Canada warbler and the common nighthawk were documented. The Canada warbler was actually in several locations, so that was a really nice one to get. That was my first time seeing them actually, so it was exciting for me. And this is just to give you a little picture of some habitats here. So as you can see, the water was really, really high. I'm not sure how many of you got up to Northern Ontario this spring, but this was the big river. This is our first day, actually. We were lucky that this water was high because there were several little beaver dams that we had to go over. But as you can see, this area is kind of marshy, lots of little dense shrubs. And even on this first day, we saw so many warblers in this area. So that was really, really nice, a good introduction. And we were in a lot of areas with mature conifers. One neat thing about birds is that they're really good environmental indicators. So they can teach us a lot about the health of an ecosystem. And one species that we had was brown creeper, which we saw quite often. And they are an indicator species for healthy, mature coniferous forests. So it was nice to see them. And it was, it just goes to show that these areas that we went through are really mature and thriving. So it was nice to see that. And so to the bottom left is the brown creeper that we saw there. Some other fun ones were the Boreal Chickadee, top left. I don't see a lot of those in the Thunder Bay area, but they are there. They're found more north. And then the black-backed woodpecker was a fun one to see, which I also don't see very often. So just a few little fun ones. And the black-backed woodpecker and the American woodpecker are actually also found most of the time in mature coniferous forests. So yeah, lots of forest birds, which is great to see. So the atlas data can guide environmental policies, conservation strategies, and land use planning, among several other uses. In the case of our trip, the data contributed, like I said, to the Friends of Wabakimi's comments on the forest management plan. So that was really nice to have some data to contribute to that. Yeah, I think that's all I was going to say about that. And I just wanted to mention, you may know that the Boreal Forest is known as a bird nursery due to the high number of birds that breed there. But it just goes to show that there is a lot of information to collect. And as paddlers who travel extensively, maybe throughout the Boreal in the province, there is really good opportunity to participate or to collaborate and kind of contribute more data to the atlas. It also goes to show that the Boreal is very important, and we've got to make sure that some of it is staying intact for these birds too, because if they're losing habitat in the Boreal, they're also potential to lose their habitat in their wintering grounds. And so birds are unique in that sense. They're kind of a little bit more at risk because they have several places where they reside and therefore have more risks to their livelihood. So here are some examples of how you could get involved if you're interested. So of course you can register to contribute data to the atlas. So if you wanted to record checklists or record incidental counts or conduct point counts, you have to register. It's pretty easy, but you just have to make an account to make sure that you're entering your data to the atlas. You can use the app, but there are also still data sheets. Some people prefer to use the written data sheets, and then you just enter them manually. There are also far north trips, which some of you have probably heard about. I know a couple of folks here are actually going to join a far north trip, which is so exciting. So I'll show you the little map here. There's about 10 trips being planned for next year. I'm sure that most of these plans are already underway. So I'm not sure what it looks like in terms of availability for paddlers to join a trip, but there is still until 2025 until the atlas is over. So there's more opportunities in the future, if not. The atlas obviously needs very experienced birders on these trips, but if they have a sufficient number of birders within a group, they also do need experienced paddlers and people who are kind of up to the challenge of going up to these areas. So that's also another way to get involved if you're keen. Carl is the Birds Canada staff member who is organizing these trips. So you can always email Carl, or there is a Northern Trip section on the Atlas webpage. And then, of course, you can also set out ARUs on a trip. Keep in mind, if you do want to do this and you leave one out for the season, like I said, it has to be picked up. So that's a major consideration if it's going to a remote area. To be honest, I'm not really sure what the availability of ARUs are for the Atlas. I know that many organizations have their own. Obviously, the Friends of Wabakimi just got a handful for the park staff to use, which is great. But there may be more opportunities if there's a priority place that the Atlas is wanting to collect data and someone is traveling to that area. There's a chance that they might be able to assist with some autonomous recording units for that. And then, of course, just keeping up with the atlas. If you're interested, the webpage has an amazing amount of information. They've got all of the instructions manuals and data from Atlas 2 in there. You can go and look at old species maps, which is pretty neat. All of the data is available online, so you just have to go searching through the site in order to find it. They also have a really cool YouTube channel where they host monthly SAPI hours, they call them, and they generally have different little different topics each month. They also have a bunch of tutorial videos, which are very, very well done. Of course, they're on Twitter and Instagram, and they have a newsletter, so you can always keep up with the Atlas news there as well. And that is all that I had prepared for you here. So,
All right, I'm going to, if you'll give me the screen back, and I will, thank you. And I'm going to, here we go. I'm going to unmute everybody. We'll see how this works. Okay. So I think you have the ability to unmute and ask a question if you want. Somebody want to try that? And if it's not working, let's see, here we go. Try that. Now, see if you got a question, try it unmute. There you go, Berlin. Thank you.
Yeah, it's working now. I have a question for Kristen. What percentage, I'm just curious, I'm not a birder, even though I love the birds, but what percentage of the time do you use the song or to identify these birds?
I would say it definitely depends on the time of year. Obviously, in the spring, when the birds are singing the most to either defend their territory or attract mates. I honestly probably like 95% of my time surveying was just by song. Keep in mind too, like in the spring, a lot of time, well, in the spring and summer during that breeding season, a lot of the foliage is coming back up too. So even though the birds are really flashy and colorful, if you can't see them, you can't identify them. And often they just hide in the leaves or in the shrubs. So yeah, I would probably, for me, 90 to 95% of the time is just songs and calls.
Thank you.
Robert, you have a question? Oh, you have to unmute yourself, I believe.
There it goes. Yeah, I have not done a Wabakimi trip, which I'd like to at some point in my life, but I go to Quetico pretty regular. Are they doing the same type of activities in Quetico?
Yeah, I'm not honestly certain exactly what they're doing there, but I do know that they've definitely had some atlasers working in there. And I remember, I think I had a friend go to Quetico and they had posters everywhere about the atlas. So I'm not gonna lie, I don't know exactly like what the organization is, but there's definitely people who are focusing their surveys in Quetico.
Find more info on the Breeding Atlas website, possibly?
Yeah, I think what I would do, so on the Atlas page, I'm just gonna find it and I'll put it in the chat. One thing I didn't explain is that the province is also divided into regions, into 47 regions, and each region has a regional coordinator. And so the regional coordinators are the people who keep it up with the where the data is being collected, gaps in data, stuff like that. So what I would probably do is reach out to the coordinator of the Quetico area, which I think would be the Kenora district, but I'm gonna put it in the chat. And they would probably be able to tell you who is atlasing in there or what is going on.
Thank you.
Kristen, what was the most surprising bird you guys censored? Or maybe was there one year you didn't expect to see or hear?
You know, I don't think I was actually surprised.
Or pleasantly
Oh,
surprised, maybe, hey, we didn't think this one was doing as well as it was, and there's lots of
right.
males.
Yeah. So let me start off by saying this is kind of the opposite of pleasantly surprised, but because the water levels were really high, there were not a lot of waterfowl.
Right.
So I'll say that that's the thing I was most surprised by, was just the lack. Like, I think I saw like 2, maybe 3 ducks the entire time we were there. So I'm assuming that had to do just with the water level rising, and there was not really a lot of riparian zones or like a lot of habitat for nesting. Pleasantly surprised. I think just the sheer number of ruby-crowned kinglets was kind of surprising. They were honestly everywhere, just constantly in the background singing. And for those of you who don't know, like, those are like tiny birds.
Yeah, with a big song.
They're so loud. Yeah. So I just remember hearing them the first day, and then they just never stopped.
Yeah, they're prolific singers. I have a follow-up question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You can circle back to me too, because I could talk birds all night. You showed a picture of a nighthawk there. Were there any whippoorwills census?
I did not hear any whippoorwills, but I do know that you may know this too. In that area, there have been records in the past, and like near Armstrong. But I didn't hear any personally. Although, like Vern said, like that ARU data hasn't been interpreted yet, so there's a chance that there might be whippoorwills recorded.
It'll be great.
Yeah.
I'll turn it back. I have lots more birding questions, but I'm letting other people ask questions.
I could be here all night too, so it's
or not.
Is the data from other bird areas, including this one, giving you a picture of bird species that are moving in the last, let's say, 10 years, that prior to that they were not found in the Boreal Forest?
I don't know if I have enough expertise to really speak to this, honestly, but from what I do know, there are definitely birds shifting north. Being in Thunder Bay, I've seen a lot more just rare species showing up more regularly. The trumpeter swans have been increasing in population. I would say the American white pelicans too. Probably like 20 years ago, they weren't really in the north, and now they've got several good populations. In like the Dryden area or in Lake Nipigon. But as for forest birds, I don't really know off the top of my head, although I'm sure by looking at the Atlas data or other reports, you can find that information. There's also, I'm just going to write in the chat here, there's 2 reports that I found very interesting, and they're like very visually pleasing. There's the State of Canada's birds, which was done in 2019, and then there's the State of the World's birds, which was released this year, and they show some really interesting trends in populations. So you might find that interesting.
Thank you.
I'm going to just editorialize just for a second or two, and then maybe some other questions will come out. But the route that we paddled in the forest management plan has a 200-meter buffer. And outside of that 200-meter buffer, it's over the next 30, 40, 50 years is going to be clear cut. And so that's been one of my frustrations, is recognizing that 62 birds, that's a pretty hefty number, but it's only going to be in these little narrow corridors that have been identified as paddling routes. the area outside of that is going to be heavily logged over the course of the 10-year plan. So the Friends have been very involved, and we've actually taken the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to task, and we filed I'll use the word conflict resolution. I don't think that's the technical term they use. And we just had a hearing a couple of weeks ago, and we're waiting to get back what their response to that is. But there's an awful lot of clear cutting taking place up there, and there isn't a whole lot of buffer around it except on these canoe routes, which and this was one of the routes that we paddled. So I'll stop editorializing with that. Maybe another question has come up.
Kristen, you seem to, I don't know if I misunderstood, but you were fairly new to canoeing and canoe tripping. Was that the case? On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being manageable, 10 being absolutely horrible, how bad were the bugs?
Oh, 1.
Really? I would have expected huge.
It was the best Atlas trip that I went on, only because I could actually hear the birds and there weren't like 1,000 mosquitoes buzzing around my head. It was the very end of May to like the beginning of June. And so by the end of the week, some of the mosquitoes were coming out. But at that point, I was almost, I hated to say it, but I was kind of happy to see them. I was like, oh, good, all the birds have food. Flash forward another month, I was very much getting eaten alive. So
I mean,
I highly recommend paddling in May.
in May, the ice had just gone out, and there was still snow in the parking lot when we started.
Wow.
So it was
Wow.
cool,
Yeah.
and the water level was high.
Those recording units you're using, are they something that people can purchase like on the market, or and what's the average cost of one of those?
You know, I looked this up earlier this year. They're fairly costly. I don't actually remember. Actually, I was gonna say I don't remember what kind we used, but it was the Song Meter Minis.
Right.
Vern, do you know what they cost?
You know, I should know. We just raised money for. I think our goal was to raise 6,000 or 7,000 Canadian for 10 units, and we actually raised over 9. So if you can kind of do the math backwards from that, but I can't give you an exact number per unit. They're not cheap.
Yeah.
Cheaper than a new canoe, more than a canoe pack.
Sure. Yeah,
All right.
that's a good analogy.
Paddler jargon.
The email for the fellow for the Far North trip, is that on the website, Carl?
It is, but I can give it to you. I can give
Yeah.
it to you here. Yeah, Vern is in the midst of planning one of these trips.
Yeah,
I
we're trying to
believe.
go down the Satchico River, and we're just working our way through the details. It's turning out to be more complicated than I thought. We may still end up going, but there's a lot of details, and particularly in these remote routes. And one of the details is there's 87 class 3, class 2 drops on this route, and so it's kind of a head scratcher. It's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, you just scared me off that one, Vern.
Yeah, well, I mean, my problem is I don't mind the run of the whitewater. It's just the amount of time that you have to spend counting the birds and then working that around the whitewater. There are 2 different things going on there at the same time, and it's going to be entertaining to try and make that match out. But it's a very remote area. I'm kind of looking forward to exploring it. And if we can do some science while we're there, that's even better.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that, but I would say I would consider myself close to an expert birder, but a slightly better than novice paddler with not good whitewater experience. So I don't know that I'd be the right person.
Well,
for that particular trip.
with that said, Kristen, are there more squares that need to be done in areas that do have more flat water?
Yeah, I don't know what the status of all of the other trips are or what the whitewater looks like. So that's why I say like it's always worth it to reach out to the organizers. But it is getting to be the time where they're really trying to solidify plans. So for next season, it might be cutting it close. But with that being said, in that first diagram I showed you of the road accessible north and the far north, like within that, I'm not sure what the coverage has looked like. I'm sure that they need more coverage in all of those areas. So even the road accessible north, like where we were, or just kind of the northern Ontario, as we would call it, but not super remote. I'm answering this in a totally roundabout way, but they're basically wherever you are, it's worth it to collect data. And even for our trip this year, like the 5 squares that we passed through had never been surveyed before.
Yeah.
So it is obviously valuable to see what birds are there. But in terms of the atlas, it's not necessarily a priority because they also want to compare the data to the previous atlases. So they want to focus on the squares that had been surveyed. Obviously, with that being said, if there's like a keen birder going out to paddle through 5 squares, obviously they want some data to be collected. So there is opportunities to contribute no matter what kind of trip you're doing. It's just, it would be like different types of data would be more valuable or less valuable to the atlas.
So where are you headed to do more birding then? You're leaving your current position and
I am, yes, my contract is ending. I'm actually fleeing the winter and in a couple weeks I'm going to Costa Rica and Colombia with my partner to do some more birding and to just explore. But we're both birders, so it'll be a whole new challenge to learn Central and South American birds.
you're going to love Costa Rica.
I'm so excited.
Have you gotten one of the field guides for down there yet? They are
Yeah.
massive. They're
Yeah, there's like 30 pages of hummingbirds and
yeah,
quite
and
daunting.
every flycatcher looks alike, and there's like 800 of them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know.
But it's fun.
I have enough trouble with Northern Ontario flycatchers, and there's only like 4.
Make sure that you go to Monteverde while you're down there.
We just booked our place in Monteverde today.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So yeah, more birding on the horizon. I hope that I'll be able to do some more atlasing in the future, but for now, I'm not sure where I'm going. So.
Well, please keep us in your trail so we know where you're at, because we would love to partner up with Kristen again. She really did a great job, a very detailed study, as you can guess, and you got to deal with all the work details that go along with moving a boat across the landscape. And she did an excellent job of juggling all those. And hopefully my snoring didn't interfere with the counts too badly. But it was a real pleasure paddling with Kristen. And I really enjoyed the fact that it wasn't just an adventure. Hopefully we were contributing to science and preservation of some of these boreal species. And from a very selfish standpoint, most of these birds pass through my backyard early in the spring on their way, and the fall when they go north and south. So it was kind of fun to actually see where they build a nest, not just see them come flying through it for a short period of time. So I really thank Kristen and Ontario Nature for the partnership, and I think it worked out very well. And I look forward to continuing that relationship. If I can, I'm going to try and do bear with me here. See if I can do this. We're going to do. All right. So hopefully everybody can, they can see it. And this is the birdsong meters that we were raising money for. And again, you saw the ones that Kristen, this one has a padlock on it. They must be expecting some really big predators to show up. And as I noted, we met and exceeded our goal. Our goal is to raise 8,000, and we raised over 9,000, which one of the neat pieces that may come out of this is that we may actually, the Friends of Wabakimi may end up just buying our own recorders, and then asking volunteers on self-guided trips to place them in places that the park needs them, and then have other volunteers do like Krista did and retrieve them. Now, we haven't got that all worked out, but we have more money than they needed for the 10. And there's a possibility that we may end up buying some and then having volunteers place them and retrieve them. Now, that's still to be worked out. But I think it's a neat opportunity to be a part of citizen science. So with that said, we did have over 51 people that gave over $50, and I randomly used a random sorter yesterday, and Philip is our winner, and he's going to get a custom tarp. I'm not sure how he's going to get it, but I don't think he was on the call tonight. But that is who is of the 51 people that made a major contribution to this project. He will be getting a tarp, and we'll have to figure out how to get it to him. So if anybody knows him, spread the word. We'll share that with him at some point. And with that said, Kristen, do you have any final thoughts, or does anybody else have any more questions for Kristen? Kristen, you have the final word.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for having me, Vern. It was really nice to chat with you again and to see some new faces. Also, if my contract with Ontario Nature obviously is ending, but I'm always interested in learning more about the work that you're doing with the Friends of Wabakimi and obviously with birds. It's my main passion. So if anybody wants to get in touch, Vern has my personal email, I think, Vern. I'll make sure you have that. So
I have your Ontario Nature. Will that still hold? Or
yeah.
Okay.
No, I'll send you my
Okay.
personal one too,
Thank you
just
for
in
doing
case.
Yep.
But yeah, just thanks for having me. It was great to chat with you all, and I hope you enjoy your future paddling, and maybe this sparked some interest in some new birders potentially.
Thank you all for being here. Does anybody else have any last thoughts or questions?
Thank you very much, Kristen.
Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Enjoy Costa Rica.